Okay, I want to talk about a buddy of mine named Dudley Walsh. I met Dudley in Sturgis, South Dakota in about I think it must have been about 1988. I didn't actually meet him, but I was in the shitter. And, back then we camped at a campground called Red Arrow. And the shitter that's where you went to shit. And that's where I went that day. And he was there with his lady named Kelly. And they were having this little conversation outside the door. And apparently they were having some issues. Well, so, I just listened to it. Didn't know who this guy was. And so as the next day or two went back to camp and here's Dudley. And Dudley he was from Missouri. At the time, he was living in California. So obviously Dudley was an important person in all the people that were there, and I didn't know who Dudley was. So, so it was like, now it's a year later, it's the next Sturgis. And that was the first year that I ever took Sharon to Sturgis. So we were down at check-in, and at this particular campground, if you checked in, you got a beer. Well, Sharon doesn't drink, and so we checked in, and I got 2 beers. Well, on the way in, people said, "Did you see the naked lady laying alongside the road?" And I go, "Well, no." Back then everybody rode a Harley. Nobody did a motorhome, but now it's all motorhomes. But anyway, so now we're up there at check-in, and I got my 2 beers, and here's this lady sitting over there with her boyfriend. And all she had on was a pair of suspenders, and I don't know what held her pants together in the middle, but I'm assuming it was suction, because that's the only thing that would keep pants that small together in the middle. Well, Sharon was upset with me because I was looking at her, and I'm going, well, I didn't dress her. She's sitting there with her boyfriends. What? So anyway, we went back to where we had set up our tent, and then, we went back down by this same shitter that I had first heard Dudley, and we had a little conversation, and my conversation was, well, this is the way that it is. If you can't handle it, I'll put you on an airplane home. Well, it was about 2 hours later, and Dudley came over to me, who I'd heard about the previous year, and he came over to me, and he says, "Jack, that was probably the sweetest little soliloquy I've ever heard." And basically, what I was just telling Sharon was, well, this is Sturgis. I didn't dress her. I didn't chase her down. This is the way that it is. And so Sharon just decided to stay, and me and Dudley had a conversation. So the aside to that is that the next day we were downtown in Sturgis, and this one place that I always went to, only way they had the Chippendales guys down there. Okay, so here's Sharon down there the next day, stuffing dollar bills down the Chippendales guys' little panties. And, that's the way that it is. It's not about, so I'm sitting there looking at this half-naked chick, and she's downtown stuffing dollar bills down the Chippendales. That's the way it is. It's not about, anyway. So anyway, that's when me and Dudley first really kind of met, and we started talking to each other. So, like I say, this was back in about, had to have been 88, 89. Well, after that, me and Dudley, we made a connection, and so we started to talk to each other. So it was kind of a silly thing that, back then I lived way out of town, and so I'd get all kind of about half shit faced on a Friday night, and I'd call him, and he always answered the phone. Dudley Walsh. Dudley, this is Jack. And me and Dudley would talk, we just talk about shit for an hour and a half. And that's the way that it was. I mean, we just had an instant connection. Okay, time goes on, so now it's 7, 8, 9 years later. And I decided I got to get out of Colorado, and Dudley in the meantime says he's going to come to visit me. And so anyway, he comes out. This is in 1998. Is that a long time ago? Yeah, it's a long time ago. Okay, so in 1998, Dudley comes out to my house when I lived out in Elizabeth, and we had a 4th of July party, and me and Dudley decided we're going to ride out to see some of his friends that live over on the West Coast in, it's starting to snow. Okay, anyway, so anyway, he comes out, spends a couple nights at my house in Colorado, and we rode up to Idaho. I'll never forget, we were some little shithole town in Wyoming, and we're going to check in, and Dudley walks in, and he says, and this old guy sitting there, and Dudley walks up to him and says, will you rent room to a couple old lesbians? And the guy looks at us and he says, well, we don't like men either. And he says, and this guy, and it was actually a very good question, because lesbians don't like men. So if you're a man and you don't like men, obviously you're a lesbian. So that's where we checked into this motel room. There's a couple of old lesbians. And so anyway, so we rode up to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is where we live now, and we rode into town, and the first place we stopped, Dudley always, I was always one of the guy to put a camp up. Dudley always wanted to find the first bar. So we rode into Coeur d'Alene and we found a bar. Next door, there was a hotel. So, 3 hours later, I get us a room at the hotel. And long story short, I ended up living up here and Dudley didn't. So anyway, so we, the next day, I went to a job interview and I met Dudley at a bar afterwards. Duh, And then we went over to the West Coast to a little place called Anacortes, which he had a friend that lived in Anacortes. And, that's north of Seattle. And we spent about 3 or 4 days there with his friends, with his friends. And one night we went, we went downtown to a restaurant. And while we're down there at the restaurant, and we're sitting there, and I don't know, it was a Mexican food restaurant, whatever it was. And anyway, this little weird kid kept coming by the table, pushing one of them little sweeper brooms. Now, about the third time he comes by, Dudley taps him on the shoulder and says, the next time you come by here, I'm going to shove it up your hiney. And I'm thinking, oh, shit, Dad, what did you just, All right, so anyway, this is a little town over there on the West Coast. And so we finish eating our meal and we get ready to, and I turned around and I looked at the table this little weird ass carpet sweeper came from. And so anyway, so now we're headed, we're leaving and we're headed out the door. And I figured this woman, this was a big woman. And I don't know if they were her brothers or her friends, but they were bigger than her, which was not would have been these were big guys. And so I thought, oh, shit, here we go. So So I walk out the door, waiting to get hit in the face, and I look up the street, and here's these two big dudes walking up the street, but here's this fat chick standing right by the door. So I thought, okay. So I stood there, and pretty soon, it was, 30 seconds later, here comes my buddy Dudley. He walks out the door, and this fat chick gets in his face. And, and I'm just standing there, and pretty soon she just walks off, all frustrated with the whole situation, and she walks up the street. And Dudley comes over, and I says, so what was all that all about? He says, well, she wanted to know if I said what I said. And I asked her, I says, if I wanted to put up with your kids' bullshit, I would have come to your house for dinner. And I thought, what a great response. What a goddamn great response. Because, it's like she takes her little piece of shit kid out, and we got to put up with this bullshit. And Dudley just flat laid her out, and she didn't know what to do. And of course, her brothers or whoever they were already gone up the street. Okay, so now it's a couple years later, and I'm down in San Francisco. And Dudley's grandpa was an original Hells Angel. And Dudley's grandpa was a fighter pilot in World War II. And so Dudley had his grandpa's coat. And back then, they were trying to decide what the coat should look like and what the patch should look like. Well, Dudley's grandpa's patch looked the opposite of what the patches look now. And Dudley had this coat, and it was given to him by his grandpa. Dudley knew Sonny Barger. Sonny Barger was the head of the Hells Angels, okay? Anyway, so one day, Dudley gets a knock on the door, and there's some big, dumb fucking Hells Angel guy standing there and says, you got to give me your coat. And Dudley says, I don't know what you're talking about. He says, that coat, that belongs to the Hells Angel. And Dudley was, being Dudley, says, fuck you. That my grandpa gave that to me. And the guy says, we'll see. And Dudley says, you're right, we will see. So about 2 hours later, there's a knock on the door. And the same guy was standing there because in the meantime, Dudley had called his buddy, Sonny Barger, who's the head of the Hells Angels, and the same guy was standing at the door saying, I'm sorry, Mr. Walsh, what can I do to make this up to you? And Dudley basically said, fuck you, that's my grandpa's coat, and when I want to turn it over to the Hells Angels, I'll turn it over to the Hells Angels. Because, years before that, Dudley and Sonny had talked about this coat. And Sonny Barger basically told Dudley, you're right, that's your grandpa's coat. So here's Dudley standing down the Hells Angels. In about 2002, Dudley had been retired. Okay, another quick story aside to the Sonny Barger story. Back when I had another friend named Jerry, and Jerry and Dudley lived in Springfield, Missouri. And Jerry called Dudley and says, hey, Sonny Barger's in town. I want to go get his autograph. And Dudley says, okay. He says, well, how do you think we're going to handle this? And Dudley says, well, just come over to my house because Sonny's asleep on my couch. And And Jerry says, oh, so here again, Dudley was never a Hells Angel. Dudley was just one of these guys that everybody wanted to know. And, okay, so I had another little story to tell here, and I'm not sure if I can remember it, but that's my Dudley story.
Cool. Is that it?
I think. No, that's not it. In about 2002, Dudley had come up through Idaho once or twice. We were on our way to Sturgis. And about 2002, I got a call. Dudley was supposed to be up here, and we were going to ride to Sturgis. And I got a call that Dudley had died at his daughter's house. And I don't know. I guess the only thing I can say there is a very special man died on his way to see me. That's it.
Cool. Thank you, Jack. We good?
We're good.
That was awesome.
I want to talk about my buddy Ron Tuscan. Me and Ron first met each other sometime back in the 70s. I'm not really sure what year in the 70s, because sometimes I can't remember what happened yesterday. How could I remember something that happened 40 years ago? But anyway, me and Ron worked at this printing company. Back then, Ron had a job. It was called a stripper. Now that was in the printing business. He didn't ever have to take his clothes off, but stripping was what you did with film and negatives in the printing business. And anyway, back then, me and Ron would talk and yak and stuff. So anyway, now it's, I don't know, 6-8 years later, and me and him didn't work together anymore. But in the meantime, every once in a while he'd call and we'd go out and have a beer. So this is in 1985. He called me and he said, let's go to Sturgis. Well, I'd been to Sturgis one time in 1977, but we decided to go to Sturgis. Well, back then, I had a V65 Honda, and he was riding a 900 Suzuki. So we went to Sturgis, and we went to Sturgis. Well, I mean, I'm not going to talk about Sturgis. I want to talk about Ron. So we came home after Sturgis, and on the way home, his 900 cow Suzuki started using a lot of oil. Well, anyway, so now the next year, he bought himself a Harley. And he called me and he said, well, let's go to Sturgis again. So this is, 86. And so we went to Sturgis, and I had my V65 Honda, and he had his Harley. And so we went to Sturgis. And, back then, Sturgis is way different than it is now. We went there and we camped. Back then Sturgis had a city park, and that's where we went. And we camped in City Park. Well, we had one tent. So me and Ron slept in the same tent. Of course now, two guys sleep in the same tent. You think they're gay guys. Well, okay. We weren't gay guys. We were just guys that slept in the same tent. So anyway, we did Sturgis and drank a lot of beer and did all that shit. And so now it's the next year, and I got me a Harley, because I decided on the way home that, a Harley is the thing to ride. So here's my buddy Ron, who, he wasn't much of a biker. you know, I took him out trail riding. He bought a dirt bike, and he was a piece of shit dirt bike rider. You know, I was a good dirt bike rider. He was a piece of shit dirt bike rider, but he was always willing to try. So as time goes on, this was back in 1985. Me and Ron kept going to Sturgis. There's not enough tape here for me to tell you all the stories about Sturgis. I'm going to tell this one. There was one time we had, you know, back then you had to camp out of town, and so we camped out of town, and we rode into town on a, I don't give a shit what day it was, but we got into town, and it started to rain, and so we went in, and it was raining. It was hard, and we were parked our bikes on Main Street, and we went into this bar. Well, the bar back then was called Gunners. Well, Gunners was the Hell's Angel bar. Same story I told about Dudley. I've got a connection with the Hell's Angels, and I never even wanted to. Anyway, so we went into this bar, and it was like 10 o'clock in the morning. Well, at 10 o'clock in the morning, there's nothing else to do in Sturgis but drink. So we started to drink. And we sat down at this table, and as it was, there was another couple in there, this guy and this gal, and they were from Edgewater, Colorado. Duh. You know, I mean, I don't know how all that happened. But, so here we are, we're sitting in this Gunner's bar, and every time you had to take a piss, you had to go back, and here's the biggest man you ever seen in your life, and the only way you could go in to take a piss, you had to take a hit off his beer can bong. Well, you know, I never did all that shit, but so I got to piss, and he says, well, if you want to piss, you got to take a hit off the beer can bong. So, you know, here's this bent beer can with all this dope stuff down the side of it, smoking, and I go, and he says, okay, you're good to go. So, you know, I went in and took a piss. Well, that was me and Ron. We got back to the campground that day, and we had put up a tent. There was only me and him, and there was this tent. Well, right next to us was this 55 Chevy with two guys and a gal. Well, they had put up a tent. Well, their tent sucked. I mean, their tent was like all full of water. And so they're trying to lay their shit out and get it all. So I told them, you know, being the nice guy that I am, I said, listen, we got a place for her to sleep, but you guys are going to have to sleep someplace else. Well, of course, Ron thought that was funny. Well, they didn't think that was funny. Over the years, okay, another story. We went into Torrington, Wyoming one night on the way to Sturgis, and it was Chippendales night. Well, we didn't know that. You know, we just pulled in and parked at this bar and walked in, and the whole bar is full of women, and me and him. Well, obviously the women weren't looking at me and him, they were looking at the Chippendales guys. So we drank a shitload of beer and left. Of course, the women were still with the Chippendales guys, and we rode out of town about 4 or 5 miles, and we pulled off the side of the road, and that's where we slept. And outside of Torrington, Wyoming, alongside the road, me and Ron just threw our sleeping bags down, and that's where we slept. And I'll never forget the next morning, it's, you know, the sun's coming up and it started getting light, and here's this couple on a Goldwing going by. Of course, you can't hear them. You can't hear them coming, so you could hear every word they said. And this lady says, "You believe that? They slept alongside the road." And I'm thinking, why is that so strange? Why is that so weird? Okay, that was one trip to Sturgis. And then another trip to Sturgis, we were outside, we rode into Newcastle, Wyoming. Okay, and on the way in, I was kind of checking out spots to camp alongside the road. So anyway, we go into Newcastle. It was like a Tuesday in Newcastle, Wyoming. Well, apparently on Tuesdays is bartender's night off, because we walked into this bar and it was full of bartenders. It was their night off. So we sit down at this table, and I don't know why it is. I'm pretty sure it was Ron, because they're not attracted to me. But pretty soon, the whole table was full of bartenders. And I'll never forget when Ron had to go up and take a piss, and he walked into the wrong bathroom. Well, this lady bartender gets up and follows him in. So he's standing there taking a piss, and she walks up behind him and taps him on the shoulder and says, "You're in the wrong bathroom." And you know what Ron said? He said, "Okay." Okay, so now it's 2 hours later, and me and Ron go outside of town. I says, "Ron, I found this place to camp outside." This is, 1 o'clock in the morning in Newcastle, Wyoming. And I says, "Listen, I was kind of scoping this out, so here we go." So we get on the Harleys and we ride about a mile or so outside of Newcastle. And I says, "Right here," I followed this little side road. So we pulled down there, and we set up, we just threw our sleeping bags down. And so here we are, we're laying down there. And, it's like, oh, what the hell, 2, 3 o'clock. It starts to rain. Well, Ron taps me on the shoulder and says, "Jack, we got to put up the tent." I go, "No, so I roll over, and he says, well, he's got a down sleeping bag. Ron always had the best shit, and he taps me on the shoulder and says, "Jack, we got to put up the tent." So we put up the tent, and as soon as we got the tent put up, it quit raining. All right. So, Ron was this guy. I'm the guy that can walk across the room and it looks like I stomped through mud puddles. Ron could stomp through mud puddles and look like he never got dirty. Me and Ron, okay, there's another time we were coming. This was a time after Sturgis, and we came back through this same little town in Lusk, Wyoming. And we stopped at this bar. We were on our way home, and we stopped in this bar, and there was a bunch of cops from Chicago in there. And these guys were partying hard. And so we stopped in there, and of course, we started talking to them, and pretty soon, they're down there on the floor doing the alligator, and of course all these goddamn Wyoming cowboys are looking at them, and I'm, of course, these are Chicago cops. These Wyoming cowboys are not going to fuck with these Chicago cops, So anyway, we drank a whole shitload of beer there, and I walked out, and I thought that somebody had fucked with my bike, so I fell off of it, and one thing led to anyway. Ron got me up, and we rode a couple of miles out of town, and we parked alongside the road, and the next morning I wake up, and and we threw our sleeping bags down. We didn't put up a tent or anything like that. We just threw our sleeping bags down, and I wake up, and my face was like stuck to the sleeping bag. And I look up, and here's Ron. Again, we've been to Sturgis. We've done all these things. He should look and feel the same way that I look and feel. I look at him, and he's like this clean guy standing there, and he's brushing his teeth and gargling with beer. And I'm going, just the thought of beer was enough to make me want to throw up. And here he is, my idol. He's standing there, gargling and brushing his teeth. It's like, well, here, about 2 months ago, I lost him. This man was a huge part of my life for 40 goddamn years. and I lost him. And I got a gazillion stories about him and me. And unfortunately, I'm never going to get another one.